Hello and welcome to Suffragette City Radio. I'm Sobering Maid.
And I'm DJ Lippy.
Hi, so what have you been up to since we last met?
I've been in my house.
Yep.
And now I'm allowed to go out of my house.
Yep.
So I've been out of my house. That's about it. We can't really do much, can we?
No, it's still same of the sameness.
Yeah.
Stuff is opening. I managed to get a haircut. But
You've got a fringe now, I can see.
I've got a fringe to hide my rapidly ageing forehead. But yeah, it's interesting that the stuff that is opening, I mean, we could do a whole thing about this, which we won't, but the stuff that is opening seems to be a little bit more geared towards men.
Well, we went out for a couple of drinks, didn't we,
Yeah.
when the pubs opened? And fair enough, it was the first day, but it was like a proper sausage fest, wasn't it?
It was, big time.
Didn't see many women out. But that's how it is now. I don't know if you notice when because I'll clock this when you're out and about, more men out than women, it seems.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm just thinking about in terms of the stuff opening up as well. So there's been some things that have opened up that just seem very odd. And then some things that you think, well, surely they can be safe to open up. Like the beauty industry, they're still not allowed.
Well, so I know this because I'm if you know me, you know don't really bother with makeup, but one thing I do have a concession to is my eyebrows.
Mm-hmm.
So when it all opened up, I was like, brilliant. So I went into Oldham. I went to go get my eyebrows threaded in the Oldham market, and I was told the beauty salons aren't open. And then I heard that they are opening up, so I got really excited. But apparently they're not doing anything that involves anything on the face.
Right.
Which is ironic because barbers are allowed to do beards and noses, but women aren't allowed to do eyebrows.
This is what I was thinking as well. And in a beauty parlour, you can be very sterile as well, like with the masks and things.
I mean, they already do that as standard, isn't it?
And the beauty industry, I read this somewhere, the beauty industry actually is bigger GDP than the auto industry.
It's massive.
Yeah,
it's massive. But it's just seen as woman's thing, isn't it?
It's frivolous because it's beauty industry.
You know. So that annoyed me this week. I went to get my eyebrows did. I can't get them done now. So who knows when that'll happen.
Yeah.
Probably next week. You know what they're like.
Yeah.
So just do it all. Yep. No. Oh. Yep. No, it's a bit sexist. Okay, then. Yep. Oh, they're just making it up as they go along at this point.
Back of a fag packet, you know, like just what do you mean we'll have to do some sort of impact analysis or look at proper data? We'll just do what we want.
Yeah. Well, they've written it all on the road now, haven't they? Of the streets, they've got the markings down, permanent, social distance, and I'm like, oh, this might be going on for quite a while then.
Yeah.
It's the new normal.
Oh,
this is how life is now. Staying
Yeah.
home, remain indoors.
Staying home and getting mad on the internet.
Well, you know, but the internet's gone mad now, haven't they? Like everything's mad. Well, I don't know. I guess it's ironic. We've been fighting for years for access to the public sphere as women, but now there is no. Literally, there isn't no public sphere, is there?
Yeah.
Some shops are open.
Our public sphere is social media, which is run by private companies.
Yeah, Silicon Valley incels.
Yeah. Which I'll probably be getting onto in my topic a little bit. So I'm going to talk about that letter that has been going around. The letter and I'm talking about cancel culture more widely, what it means and kind of history of cancel culture, even though we wouldn't have called it cancel culture back in the day. What are you talking about?
I'm talking about the domestic abuse bill that's been weaving its way through Parliament. It's just finished its third reading. Initially it was going to come up in April, but because of coronavirus it got pushed back. So it's been going through, and so I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the ins and outs of it and what that might mean, any problems with it, things like that. I'm not a legal expert, I must put this out there right now, so I don't understand. I don't understand how legislation is legislated. That's what they say, isn't it?
Yeah, we'll say yeah.
But I'm going to give you a little potted history of what I reckon and what the internet told me the faults were with it.
Go on. So yeah, the domestic violence bill.
So this has been going through for a while now. I believe Theresa May helped push it through. It's something that Theresa May, she's working now a lot with domestic violence, and I know that she's a Tory, and you know think of what you may of those policies and how they Tory policies tend to negatively impact women, but she's got I think that this is something that she really does care about genuinely, because she's been it's been consistent throughout her political life, and this is something that she started off.
I would agree with that. I remember her when she was she Home Secretary for a bit?
Yeah,
and she had some awful policies. Those go home vans.
Yeah.
I'm not going to defend those at all. But I do seem to recall she was very vocal about domestic violence and about trying to change legislation.
Yeah, well, no, she's been talking about it recently. With this bill coming through, I'm not going to get onto that. But as an aside, I think Theresa May genuinely does care about this situation, and with anything with these things, I do wonder if she's got a personal history. She don't necessarily have to talk about it, but it's something maybe possible.
Yeah, or someone close to her, you know. Yeah.
Because I mean, it can affect any woman. It doesn't have any class basis. It's the domestic violence bill. Some of the highlights, they're looking for a new statutory definition that explicitly recognises the gendered nature of domestic violence.
Good, yeah.
That it is mainly males on female abuse. I'd be interested to see how that's written in the legislation, whether or not they use gender or sex. Could be key. But it's putting coercive control at like the centre of it, recognising that often abuse is not physical, but there is sort of like many elements around it, including economic abuse, which is one thing that traps women in abusive relationships, is that their husbands will control their bank accounts and have all the money, and so it's very difficult to leave if you've got no money, basically.
We talked about this on the podcast before, like Tory policies like universal credit, making economic control and economic abuse much easier for men to perpetrate.
Yeah, well, that's something that needs to be looked at really, isn't it? But you know, as a digression, it's looking at reframing domestic abuse, and so it just reflects reality, I suppose.
Yeah.
Also, they're looking at things like forced marriage, honour-based violence, and FGM, and including these specifically into the bill.
Great.
Another thing, which is a great one, the rough sex defence. They're looking to ban this. Now, this is a lot of court cases where women have been strangled and the husbands basically said it was a sex game gone wrong, and it's been colloquially named the rough sex defence. And is it Harriet Harman? Harriet Harman came out and said this is ridiculous and we need to stop it, so they put a provision in to stop people using that defence in court of law when they kill the wives or the partners. Another good thing is they've put a statutory right to relationship and sex advice in schools for girls, which is something that is needed, is to teach girls about red flags and what a healthy relationships look like. What is abuse, you know, because it's staggering how normalised it's becoming. So that is a good thing if that comes through. Another good thing is a statutory right for employees to vary their working arrangements if they're suffering from domestic abuse. So the employer has to, you know, give you a bit of leeway to, you know, if you escape an abusive relationship, you can get some time off.
Yeah.
Flexible working with your family and things like that. Another thing is they want to create a role called the Domestic Abuse Commissioner and create some domestic abuse protection notices and domestic abuse protection orders. Now, I believe this will mean that if you want to prosecute or report abuse, it no longer has to come from the victim. So social services, doctors, professionals will be able to report the partner of the person.
That's good.
So that's sort of helping victims and people. You know, I think one of the problems with abuse is that it's, you know, women are often groomed into it, so it's very difficult for them to see, even if they're being like, if going to the doctor and they've been like raped or battered, you know, it can be difficult for them to take that step and go to the police themselves. So it's taking that and, you know, giving it to different bodies.
There's also another angle to that that's just occurred to me. There was a journalism prize winner, I can't remember the name of the prize, for a piece that was about domestic violence in the police. And basically, if you are abused by your partner who is a police officer, it's pretty much hell on earth to try and get anything done about it. And there's reports of intimidation from the perpetrator's colleagues in the force, reports of, you know, them losing evidence, losing statements and things like that because they want to protect their mate. And so in those conditions, it's going to be really hard. But then if you have other figures of authority like doctors who are then reporting it, maybe that would help some women who might be in a situation like that.
Yeah, and also I think there's a bit of the note in here about training people who work in these frontline services to recognise red flags in domestic abuse, so they can maybe escalate it and do a bit more investigating. Which is, we've got a lot of safeguarding training with regards to like vulnerable children and vulnerable people, so it's just adding to that range of information that people can have, so they can escalate it, or just check and make sure things are okay. They also NSPCC have ensured that that children are now recognised as victims, and another piece, they want to make guarantees in courts, so they want to give screens for people who are giving evidence.
Right.
If it's a wife giving evidence about her husband, she can have a screen. She doesn't have to be in the same room. Video links, and also they want to get rid of. Currently, perpetrators are allowed to cross-examine the victims, which has been described as like a second level of victimization, basically. So there's recourse to stop that happening. And so they've released £76 million in funding for these changes, but again, in many things, sounds like a big figure, but it's a drop in the ocean.
Oh yeah.
They need to build a lot of sort of infrastructure to deliver this, and Women's Aid have said that it would require £173 million to create a network to support migrant women alone.
Gosh. Right. Yeah. So it's a lot of big chat.
Yeah. But where's the money?
Yeah.
And that does bring us on to another problem with it. The major problem that's come about with this bill is there's no recourse for abused migrant women to get access to public funds.
So what is public funds in that situation?
So it would be if you were escaping a partner. If you would like to go to an abuse, like a refuge or a shelter, the standard practice is that it's paid for by housing benefit, but because migrant women won't have access to those funds, then they wouldn't have any money for that. Step Up Migrant Women, who are a coalition of 50 BAME frontline services, just say this is like a gaping hole, and this has been the case for many years, and they were hoping that this bill would recognise this. I mean, as it stands, if you're on a spousal visa, you can access funds for 3 months, but women on any other visa have no other recourse to public funds.
Right.
So Pragna Patel from Southall Black Sisters has described this and said, the decision to leave migrant women out of the bill sends the message that their lives are not valued. They are disposable, second-class citizens. They are invisible. Which is I'd like to see some Black Lives Matter people discussing this, because it's obviously a huge gap in it's creating 2 tiers of women and 2 tiers of victims.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I think this is something we can all get behind. I've not had time to find if there's anything you can get involved with. I will look and put them in the show notes if we can find. But as ever, what's our favourite thing we say
I was
to do?
just thinking it, right to your MP. But it's true though. It's true. But I've got a Tory MP at the moment, which I'm not so happy about. However, it's the party in power, so maybe there's an advantage to that, that my MP maybe has a bit more clout. I don't know.
I mean, this is something like Theresa May's gone to the bat for this, and I think that it's something that can cut across party lines. I mean, surely everybody cares about, no matter what your political persuasion, everybody cares about battered women. And there's no guarantee that Labour care any more for women than the Tory party. If we have consistently seen their record with regards to women's rights is, well, I guess it is slightly better legislation-wise, but a lot of the attitudes that perpetrate domestic abuse are received in spades in the Labour Party. So.
Leftist men aren't immune from it. Yeah. No,
definitely. And like I say, Theresa May, I've been hearing her talk a lot about this bill, raising certain issues, and the fact that this is all very nice paperwork, but Refuge reported a 1,000% rise in women seeking support from their services in May because of the lockdown.
1,000%.
And we already know that Women's Aid, which is the body that represents all the refuges in the UK, They were already struggling for funds before any of this. You know, they were having to close down a lot of the services, so there's already not enough. And sad to say, like, you know, last ditch resort is to flee and go to a women's hostel, and you know, struggling at the moment to fund it because there's no funding for anything really, is there?
No, and that's what I was thinking as well. You know, where does this money come from? Because they've got enough money to waste on a track and trace app that doesn't work, but yeah, it's really frustrating. But something just occurred to me that I was at a meeting thing, a Zoom meeting seminar thingy with some Manchester women. We were looking at domestic violence actually, and we were talking about it. And somebody who works with the frontline services, she said who was leading the seminar, she said it had been really interesting. And I think this was towards the end of April. She said at that point they hadn't actually seen a huge uptick in service use, and they think that part of that might have been because because everyone was at home, there was a sense of control from the perpetrators. So the women weren't actually accessing those services that much at the start of lockdown, but that since then it's obviously, as you say, 1,000% increase. And I thought that was just really interesting, that actually at the start of lockdown a lot of abusers obviously loved it because they've
got an excuse. Now they're suddenly protecting the world and they're protecting their families, and you have to stay at home.
And that, and because the women couldn't go out, there was kind of a sort of, I guess, a calm before the storm.
Yeah. I mean, if you are in trouble at the moment and you know you need support, we'll put some links in the description and places to go for support, because there is support out there. I know that the British Rail have said that if you're fleeing domestic abuse, you can get, if you speak to Women's Aid, they'll give you a pass so you can get on any train service to get out and get away from it. We will leave links in the description. Some links in the description so you can get some support. You know, and do you know, this is something I've seen in I'm in a totally apolitical women's ladies in lockdown Facebook group, which is, I'm just in it for, you know, a bit of low-key feminism. Every now and again I'll post a picture of a clitoris, like, what's this? You know? And, you know, post the odd thing. But, you know, I am seeing stories and women coming through and, like, fleeing husbands and partners and looking for support. And it's, you know, it's heartbreaking. And it's at this stage, I think in the past couple of weeks, I've seen 2 women speaking out about it. So, you know, it's a real concern, and, you know,
there's you can always Google Women's Aid, your local rape crisis centre as well. There's a website, I can't remember which one, I think it might be, I don't want to say it in case it's wrong, but basically you can go on the website and there's like a one-click disguise, so if someone comes in, it disguises the website to something else. And there's always the Freedom Programme as well, which is a great resource.
Yeah, it's helping you to recognise the signs of abuse. In your partner, and just because there's different types of like techniques that will be used. And often I think we have this idea of like the battered woman, and you know, like it's very much in the concept of physical abuse, but actually there's a myriad of abuses, and you can very often somebody could never even lay their hands on you. And it's just all psychological abuse is so much more damning than physical abuse. I'd rather somebody hit me than, I don't know, like, ruin my self-esteem. Do you know what I mean? I don't want to be hit. Obviously, I'm not condoning violence of any kind. But, you know, it's, you know,
people don't realise just how damaging psychological abuse can be, and in some ways, like, it can leave deeper scars in some instances.
Most definitely. Yeah.
I'm talking about that letter, the Harper's letter.
Okay.
So I don't know. Have you read it? Have you read the letter?
I have. I skimmed it. I've read. I to be honest, I find it like, it's like a piece of modern art. The responses of people to the letter.
Quite. So the letter was signed by, I think, 152 signatories, who were essentially saying that there's been a culture of silencing people who are expressing opinions that go against the mainstream, and that this needs to stop, and that people are receiving disproportionate responses to things they've said or done, and that it's not helpful. It's not particularly helpful for writers and thinkers, in that sort of climate. They had the obligatory reference to far right and Trump, that because they shut down speech as well and everything. But then their point was that this is happening in all quarters as well. It's not confined to the far right. And my first thinking was, it's just another letter. I agree with it, but I wasn't that bothered. But then the responses, I could not believe what I was seeing. And I feel like, I'm not going to die on the hill of the letter was perfect and there was nothing wrong with it, because I have criticisms of the letter, but I feel like I've kind of cornered into defending the letter more vehemently just because the responses have been so mad.
Yeah.
Just so mad.
Well, what I found really interesting, I'm not sure the name of the person, but there were several signatories to the letter. I think I saw Noam Chomsky, who's famous.
Yep.
Long time standing. He even believes that you should have...
you should publish Holocaust denial.
Holocaust denial. He's like, they've got a right to their opinion.
Yeah.
Say things. You can knock them down. This is a free society.
He's a hardline free speech person.
And I'm probably the same. You can disagree with me on my right to have this opinion, but I am in total agreement actually. But another signatory was she who shall not be cancelled.
Yeah, Rowling. And I think so. What I thought was interesting about the responses is that it seemed to be personality over policy. A lot of people couldn't see beyond the fact that Rowling had signed it, and because they've decided that she is #problematic, they assumed that the rest of the letter must be problematic, when the point of the letter was that there were quite a few different signatories from different schools of thought.
Yeah.
And even Malcolm Gladwell, who has a great podcast actually, he tweeted saying, I don't agree with everyone who signed the letter, and that's why I signed.
Yeah.
Isn't that the point of the letter?
Yeah.
And it's just been bad. But what has been happening in some of the conversations I've been having about it, so at the core of the letter was about free speech. That free speech, they are arguing that free speech has been stifled and that this is bad. And it got me thinking about free speech as well. So we don't have free speech in the same way that they do in the US. There's people that they have the First Amendment, I think it is, which means that the government can't prosecute you for what you say.
We have quite strict speech laws actually in this country, because our libel laws are ridiculous, aren't they?
Yeah, well, we have what's called freedom of expression, and I was looking at that. So you have freedom of expression, but you may still be prosecuted by the authorities if your freedom of expression. They might prosecute you in order to protect national security, to prevent disorder or crime. So that'd be like incitement to crime and stuff. Now, this is interesting. To protect public health or morals. Yeah. To protect rights and reputations. So I think that comes down to libel. Like, you can't say whatever you want about somebody if it's not true, because you might get prosecuted for it if it's not true. They might come after you if you are disclosing information that's been given to you in confidence. And they might come after you to maintain the authority and impartiality of judges. And I thought this was all very interesting. But what the letter is arguing, so some of the main critics of the letter that I've seen have been saying arguments along the lines of, well, you're not really cancelled if you're saying something like this in a national outlet. And I'm like, did you even read the letter? Did you read the part where they said, and it must be even worse for those who don't have power?
Yeah.
My interpretation of the letter was that they were signing it knowing that they have profiles and voices.
Yeah, and they can't be cancelled.
Yeah.
They've got positions of authority within the media and educational institutions.
Exactly. And it seemed to me that people who were criticising it seemed to think that it was just a vanity exercise for them. And it may well have been. However, if you actually look at the contents of the letter, they're specifically saying that we're saying this because we want to protect the people who don't have this sort of power. And one of my criticisms was they gave examples, but they were very vague examples and not named. But then I think, well, maybe there's a reason for not naming the examples, because if these people have already been cancelled or had a horrible time, they don't want to draw more attention to it. But then, so I obviously have criticisms of the letter. But it got me thinking about cancel culture as well. through history, and oh god, I have to tell you as well, I was defending this letter in a group, and somebody said to me that that cancel culture as a pejorative term was racist.
Oh, is that because it came from Black Twitter?
I think so.
Was it reappropriated from Black Twitter? Like the Karen meme, that's okay because Black Twitter made it.
Yeah, it just.
I mean, I guess that their argument, I hear this raised, I've seen this raised quite a lot with the left, is that it's called the Popper paradox?
Yes, I wanted to talk about that. Yeah.
So, shall I talk about, is it right time to bring it in, or?
Yeah, no, go on, yeah. What?
So, I've just Googled it here, so I'm looking at it. So, this is a Jew called Popper. Karl Popper, yeah. And it's basically a paradox of civil society, which was, the Nazis got to power because there was like a very permissive liberal society which allowed them to have a platform. And
the Weimar Republic,
As soon as they got in, they removed the platform. I've got a quote here. Unlimited tolerance must lead to the disappearance of tolerance. If we extend unlimited tolerance even to those who are intolerant, if we are not prepared to defend a tolerant society against the onslaught of the intolerant, then the tolerant will be destroyed and tolerance with them. In this formulation, I do not imply, for instance, that we should always suppress the utterance of intolerant philosophies. As long as we can counter them by rational arguments and keep them in check by public opinion, suppression would certainly be unwise. But we should claim the right to suppress them if necessary, even by force, for it may easily turn out that they are not prepared to meet us on the level of rational arguments, but begin by denouncing all arguments. They may forbid their followers to listen to rational arguments, because it is deceptive, and teach them to answer arguments by the use of their fists or pistols. We should therefore claim, in the name of tolerance, the right not to tolerate the intolerant. Now, I am doing 10,000 head spins because this is often quoted by a certain section of the left who are so incredibly intolerant and fascist and cancel and attack people mercilessly under this guise.
Yeah.
But they're the ones that the intolerant ones. Yeah. Projection.
Yeah. And actually he says in that we shouldn't suppress some intolerant speech. We should counter it.
Yes.
That's what he's saying.
Rational argument, unless you can.
Yeah. But yes, and in this group, somebody was saying that to me as well, like, maybe you should familiarise yourself with Popper's thing of intolerance. And I was like, well, thank you, I'm aware of it. But also, you're arguing that what they're doing, that the people that are being cancelled or whatever are actually intolerant. And I'm like, but my point is that I would argue that what they're being cancelled for isn't intolerance, that the response of cancelling them is disproportionate because they're not being intolerant, they just have a different opinion.
Well, J.K. Rowling believes that mammals are sexually dimorphic.
Yeah.
Like women are sexes, not genders.
Yeah.
And that is considered akin to like
intolerance.
Hitler.
Yeah.
Like that you need to shut that down because that will lead to like what the genocide of is that going to lead to the genocide of all transgender people?
Yeah.
Is that literally how you think?
Yeah. And we've had sort of evidence of Karl Popper's tolerance of intolerance thing in the UK as well. So for example, we have been quite tolerant of religious intolerance, and this has led to difficult, sticky, complex situations where, for example, you have had Muslim parents protesting LGBT education in schools. Now, with this LGBT, the particular school's guidance that they were protesting, I actually have criticisms of that school guidance. And then when you spoke to you saw in some of the reports, some of the Muslim parents, some of them had legitimate criticisms, some of them just really hated gay people. But the point is that we've been intolerant of their intolerance, but then this has led to them protesting. So, but then do they have a right to protest? But my point is that it's not always black and white. We should lean into the complexity of these issues.
Well, I mean, Islamism is a perfect example. Salman Rushdie released the book, was it?
The Satanic Verses.
The Satanic Verses, which was burned in
my town.
In Bolton, Bradford, many little satellite towns to the north by Muslims who felt so outraged, and he had a fatwa put on his head.
Yep, he did.
But then people on the left defend that position and not Salman Rushdie. Salman Rushdie got cancelled for writing something that offended Islamic jihadis who want to know
And Salman Rushdie signed that letter.
Yes,
and people were just completely dismissing the letter. And I was seeing some arguments. I mean, I'm just ranting about idiotic people on the internet instead of engaging with the social contents of the letter. But it just annoyed me so much. See, idiotic arguments being like, well, these people have never been fair to be cancelled, and I'm just like,
is it that Facebook group that I think it is?
Yeah, but I'm not going to
name it. But I got kicked out of that Facebook group for being having opinions that were heterodox. And it's very intolerant. And now it's just an echo chamber.
Yeah. And I was explaining to them as well. And some of them seemed to believe that. So there was two things going on. They didn't believe that cancel culture existed as well. They A, just thought it was celebrities having a wine, and B, were like, cancel culture doesn't exist anyway. And if it does, they must have deserved it.
Well,
and closer to home, actually, there's a man called Nick Buckley, who was CEO of the Mancunian Way charity.
Yeah.
And he has done loads of really, really great work with young Black and Asian lads, getting them out of gangs into education. He's done stuff around homelessness. He's like 2 decades of working with vulnerable people, doing some great stuff. There was a petition that went round because he criticised Black Lives Matter, the organisation.
Not the actual social movement, the leadership in America.
Not the anti-racism movement, the Black Lives Matter and their stated aims, which is on their website, right? He criticised them. And whether I agree or disagree with his specific criticisms is neither here nor there. The point is that he got ousted from that charity, which I think is a disproportionate response to somebody saying something you disagree with.
Yeah.
And I'm just staggered. And so then I was trying to bring up these examples because the point is as well that you don't hear about the cancel people because they have been successfully cancelled. And when we talk about cancel culture, sometimes we see celebrities and we see them get backlash. And then after a while, they carry on and it's fine. But that's because they're celebrities with a profile.
Yeah.
But it can be life ruining for normal people when the Twitter mob comes after you. And I see it, I witness it, people saying, where do they live? Where's their employer? Let's email their employer. Let's get their address. I can see the license plate. I know who this person is. She is XY and she lives at XY. Let's get her fired.
Well, there's a reason why we don't use our own names in this podcast. We don't want to get cancelled.
Yeah.
We haven't got enough of a profile that if we did get cancelled, that people would uncancel us, like if you're a certain level, then you can't get cancelled. Or if you've got like famous friends or people who would support you, then you've got a little bit of backup there.
Yeah.
But if you're below a certain level, you've got to watch yourself.
Yeah. And Nick Buckley is someone who has a bit of a local profile, so people did hear about that. But even then, like, he was pretty, he's been ousted of his own charity. You know what I mean? It's like, it's also got me thinking about public shaming and free speech as well, and got me thinking about free speech. Essentially, free speech exists to protect minority opinion, and I really don't believe that speech should have no consequences, and that's not what I'm saying as well. And this is another thing that's been frustrating me about this argument, that if you criticise people criticising the letter, they say, oh, you just think people should speak without consequences. I obviously don't think that. However, free speech exists, or the idea of it, whatever the legislation is in whatever country you're in, but the core principle, it exists to protect minority opinion, that people should be allowed to have an opinion that is against the mainstream and they shouldn't be chucked out for that. And over the years, there are so many opinions that we take for granted right now that started out as minority opinions. Universal suffrage was a minority opinion, and the suffragettes would lose jobs for being suffragettes.
Oh yeah, I mean there was no notorious. They could lose their kids, access to the kids. The husbands would divorce them and get all have the children. They could, working class women becoming marked as troublemakers. Like a lot of socialists got the same thing happen to them for being rabble rousers, chartists.
Communists in Hollywood as well, famously with McCarthyism. A load of Hollywood writers, a lot of them Jewish people actually. So it's another criticism I find really frustrating with critics of the letter when they say things like, oh, it's just cis white intellectuals have never been cancelled. I'm thinking, have you ever read a history book ever? Anyway, so this happened in Hollywood with McCarthyism, so-called communists, and sometimes there didn't even need to be any proof, just someone could accuse you of being a communist and then you were ousted.
I'm thinking of Section 28 in the 1980s. If you were a gay teacher, then I guess it's not an opinion, but it's a similar sort of idea that somebody can lose their job for well, I guess they would be expressing an opinion that, I'm homosexual. If you were out or got outed, then you could lose your job. And the same people that bang on about how awful Section 28 was are trying to get other people sacked, cancelled,
yeah,
and sacked.
Yeah.
Many of whom are lesbians.
Yeah,
it's very much often this only cis white men are getting cancelled, but it's just interesting how Alison Bailey. Stonewall have tried to cancel Alison Bailey and have contacted her employers, worked with critics of her to get her fired. And she is a black lesbian.
And you don't have to agree with it. You don't have to agree with the stance, but this is clearly a disproportionate response. And this is the point. There is some opinions I really don't like, but I think people should be allowed to express them. But the people who are criticising the letter don't seem to understand when they say things like, if your employer should be allowed to fire you if they don't think that your values align with the employer's. And I'm thinking, do you not realise that just recently, that's why Colin Kaepernick was fired?
Who's Colin Kaepernick?
The football player who kneeled for Black Lives Matter.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Did you see what I mean? These people who criticise it aren't making the point that they think they are making.
Yeah. I mean, it's just the left have become so intolerant recently, and it's. I think they've lost the arguments. They've lost the ability to package their arguments in such a way that they have mass appeal. So they just use social shaming to silence dissent. And, people are so scared to say anything. They can't say anything, but they can say something in the ballot, can't they?
Yeah.
Which is, I think, a large part of explaining what happened with Brexit was a protest vote. And I'm really worried by this because I think the only people who win by all of this,
the elites and the right wing.
People are going to vote for really right wing parties because they're not going to, it's going to make the Tory party go more right, create a culture war, push the Tories to the right, push people in desperation to the Tories against their own class based interests, against their own economic interests, because they're sick of being told how horrible they are.
Because the left is disconnected from them.
Mad.
The left's disconnected from them. I also think there's a real arrogance in it as well. I see this a lot, that the people who get cancelled deserve it because we know that we're in the right and that their minority opinions will actually stay minority forever because they're wrong. And I just think there's a massive arrogance in that. There's an assumption that we are doing everything right just now.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, if we were getting everything right just now, we will be the first generation in the history of humanity to be getting absolutely everything absolutely right.
Yeah.
And I just can't understand people who can't even take a step back to examine what they're doing, what they're cancelling people for.
Well, I think I don't know, it's just so frustrating to try and have an argument because it's always assumption that you're arguing in bad faith and explicitly what you say is always twisted around to mean, no, actually what you mean is this. Never actually engaging with the substance of your arguments.
Yeah.
I wonder if people actually, because people are so busy getting cancelled and their work's getting cancelled, have they actually read, like J.K. Rowling is a famous example now, people have tried to cancel her for her gender critical views that she started more and more to make public.
Yeah.
And she wrote a blog post laying out very sensibly why she believes what she believes. Mm-hmm. She's made it explicitly clear that she also supports trans people. Mm-hmm. She's got many trans friends who, she feels a great affinity with them because they suffer male violence, which she also came out and said, I don't really talk about this, but I had an abusive partner. I've been raped, so I understand how that is, and I've got a lot of sympathy with this group of people. But I also have sympathy for women, and women deserve to also have spaces separate, and they, they're important as well. And you would think that she had,
personally murdered.
Yeah, or kicked a baby in the face. Yeah, people are acting like what she said is disgusting, but you ask them to read it. Have you read it? Will you read it? What is it about that you disagree with? And you can tell they've not read it.
Yeah.
And I don't know, more and more people are waking up because they've heard, oh, she's awful, she's awful, she's awful, she's a witch. And then they go and read, okay, she is transphobic. And then they read it and they go, that's not transphobic, is it?
Yeah.
I agree with that. And everybody's reading it going, yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
No. And I think people are clocking on to a lot of this propaganda that people spout is sort of out of touch with reality. Not even public opinion. It's just not rational. Well, it's irrational. They are, ironically enough, can we cancel the cancellers? Because I think they literally that earlier the Popper's paradox. They literally fulfil all of the criteria that I can see. You know.
Well, somebody commented on this post like, "I love things like this because now we know who to cancel." On the letter, and I'm like, is that a joke? Because it's a decent joke if it's a joke, but I do not think she was joking.
Well,
and what you said about in touch with reality as well, I have to question people who have a stronger emotional response to Rowling than they do to the guy who issued a fatwa against Salman Rushdie. I've got to question your calibration with reality there.
Yeah, well, you know, I mean, this is the thing. I mean, people talking about cancelling, and now there's a lot of control of speech and what we can say. Just today, I'm trying to cancel some paedophile groups on the internet. I can't cancel them.
Yeah.
You know, maps on Twitter, can't cancel them.
Yeah.
We really need to look at our priorities because it'd be very easy. Why are people getting annoyed about that?
Yeah.
You know?
And people have a right to disagree with what Rowling said, but there just doesn't seem to be a lot of engagement with what she's saying, and people are covering it by invoking Popper's paradox and saying we can't be tolerant of this intolerance.
Yeah, I won't even engage with this because by engaging it, it's almost like, you know, I've heard arguments like, you could say something like, are black people human? And you're like, well, obviously I'm not going to engage with that argument because it's ridiculous. Yeah. Like, you know, but she's not saying that. She's basically saying, are women human? You know, there's no comparison with that, and like, you know, I don't know. Like it's just the sign of a left that's trapped in some crazy paradox purity spiral, where they're just trying to outdo each other to be the most extreme and to push. Yeah, you know,
people are more concerned with being right than learning something.
Well, do you know what? I think the problem is they're scared of getting cancelled. They get cancelled in your friendship group because it's not just because we often think about this as maybe like a jobs thing or what have you. But I mean, cancelling, I think it could be like little things like getting kicked out of the Facebook group, like that group we were talking about, for example. I would not be beyond the realms of possibility if you get cancelled and kicked out of that group.
I mean, I really hope I don't. And I was so tame, but I think I might do because
I mean, you've got a very I don't find your things boring. I know why you're doing it, but you've got this such reasonable. And I'm a bit more direct to me, and that's why I get kicked out of places.
But that's good.
But like. It doesn't, but then you get kicked out and then you have no platform to speak about it though, that's what I mean. So now they're all in this echo chamber and you've got you're forced to speak through a flower. You've got to speak in a very specific way so you don't get cancelled. But even then it's not how you say it, it's what you're saying. And you know, people
Somebody called me hand-wavingly gross. Said your comments are hand-wavingly gross just for me saying I've got plenty of criticism of the letter, but I think the principle of the thing that people do get cancelled disproportionately and we don't hear about it is right and we should be worried. Hand-wavingly gross. And I'm like, what is hand-wavingly gross? And all I can think of is like, you know, the Wallace and Gromit, like hands by the shoulders, like, just somebody like making a face.
No, I think it's like,
like
a fat girl. What a fat girl's called?
Sorority girl. It's like, okay, maybe that's it.
But I just think this is the most classist piece of nonsense in the world because it's creating a world where
a clumsy mistake will get you fired.
Yeah, and like I think working class people have a very direct way of speaking that's being told. It's impossible for a working class person to speak in public on any issue anymore because if you don't like use all the buzzwords in all the particular way, then what you're saying will be cancelled basically.
Yep.
And this only serves the needs of the middle classes to exclude the working classes from the public sphere, which is fascist as fuck, basically. It's got to use the language that I'm using, but you know, this is why the working classes are not voting for the Labour Party anymore. They're not voting for the Democrats in America anymore because they're not allowed to speak and they're not allowed to even, you know, even when they're agreeing with a lot of the leftist principles, it's not even about, you know, like small nuances of difference are suddenly seen as put beyond the pale.
Yeah, they're totally intolerant and not worthy of public platform at all.
Yeah, shut up, Karen.
Yeah, but I think that the socialist position as well would be that your employer should never terminate the worker for stuff that they do outside of work as well. And all these so-called leftists are so happy to cancel somebody who maybe said something stupid on the internet or... You know, it's and I got called a neoliberal for a neoliberal centrist, and I'm like, well,
that's not an insult, really.
Yeah, firstly, it's like, that's the worst insult you can say, and it's like, oh, okay. And also, I'm obviously not, and the position I'm articulating is the socialist position that, you know, the worker shouldn't be beholden to the employees' whims. And also, I think it's interesting...
Well, this is putting capital in charge. This is allowing big, huge multinational corporations to control the speech of the world, which...
Yes, that was my next point, right?
It's really dangerous.
Because a couple of years ago, you could get fired for saying Black Lives Matter, right? But now, Black Lives Matter all the corporations are saying that themselves, whilst also a lot of the corporations are also not doing a lot for actual black people. For example, H&M saying Black Lives Matter, but then completely screwing over their workers in places like Bangladesh or...
There's no joined up thinking in the left.
No.
They don't seem to have an interest in like the international system of exploitation and how, even if you're black in the West, I'm sure police violence is very bad, but you're not a garment factory worker in India, female garment factory worker in, you know, Coca-Cola, you know, I don't know what Coke's made of, cocoa beans? I don't know, like, you're not at the bottom end of the capitalist system, and there's no understanding of how oppression works in a broader scale of things.
Yeah, and with Arsenal as well. So Arsenal been tweeting Black Lives Matter, etc., which is great. You know, obviously you and I are both anti-racist and we think Black Lives Matter. However, they reprimanded and distanced themselves from a footballer who spoke up about the Uyghur Muslims in China.
Okay.
So it's like these sorts of the principles that the letter is defending and that I'm defending and that would be the socialist position is that, you know, this footballer said what China's doing is really bad and we should all be up in arms about it. And then they got reprimanded by his employer. And I think that's wrong.
Is it being anti-Chinese or something?
Well, because he's like criticising the Chinese government for their treatment of the Muslim minority in China.
But then surely that government, maybe they're being Islamophobic because they're... You know, like all of these things contradict each other, and it just seems like people cherry pick which groups to support and which causes to support, and it changes very quickly over time. And
you can get cancelled before you know it because you've supported the wrong thing and not supported the right thing. And...
Oh, we're fucked up, Naomi. No, sobering maid.
Sorry. We've said my name on this before. It's fine.
We are though. We're screwed though, aren't we? Like, quite forthright, have different opinions to everybody else. Yeah. Like, that's not going to be good in the future, is it? And what's more is, I think these children, we've from a generation that has a bit more respect for this kind of thing. But I feel like it's really dangerous for younger people who don't really, it hasn't been a value that they've been raised with. So where are we going to be in 10, 20 years' time? You know.
Well, I'm thinking back as well. I've not, like, we need to wrap up soon, and I've not even talked about things like Janet Jackson and Sinead O'Connor being cancelled for stuff that we would be horrified for them being cancelled for now. Janet Jackson got cancelled for a boob. Do you remember?
Oh, the wardrobe malfunction.
Yeah. And Sinead O'Connor got cancelled for speaking up about paedophiles in the Catholic Church.
Which turned out to be.
True. Like, and so, yeah. But, and I think there is a difference between cancelling a famous person by not buying their stuff, boycotting their stuff.
Well, you've got a right to in a society that, you know, capitalist society. It's a great way to use your power. Isn't it?
As a consumer. Yeah. And there's a difference between that and ruining someone's life by, going to their employer, making sure that they get XYZ taken off them. Because there was one example that I see go around, a working class truck driver, he made an OK sign at a traffic light. He didn't know what he was doing. This guy was baiting him and filming him, and he made an OK sign. He didn't realise that is a racist sign between white supremacists, and that's an in-group thing. Like, you wouldn't know that unless you follow what's happening
in America,
in white supremacy world, or unless you were white supremacist. Anyway, he got cancelled, he got fired, he can't work again, all of this. And there was a quote that just stuck to me. It said, if you make a mistake, you can learn from your mistakes. But what's happened right now? How am I supposed to learn from this? It's like I was struck by lightning. And I'm like, that's cancel culture, and people are pretending that it doesn't exist.
No, it does exist. And like I say, it's the invisible victims that I think I have the most time for, because,
we never hear about them because they've been cancelled. Yeah, and there's people saying that I will not accept evidence of cancel culture. The only evidence I will accept is hearing nothing about them being cancelled. And I'm like, well, that's Kafkaesque for a start. And I get that there are some people who use the idea of cancel culture as kind of an extension. The newest extension of this is just PC gone mad. And I think we should definitely separate those things. But there's a conversation that we're not having at the moment that just seems to be at cross purposes with each other, and I don't think it's helpful, and I think we should not be afraid of the complexity of the situation.
Yes, agreed.
So what do we have coming up?
So there's been a lot of Zoom meetings at the moment. So there's one thing I really like, Feminist Question Time. Have you seen any yet?
I've been to a few. Yeah, they've been really good.
Every Saturday is at 3 p.m.
Yeah.
Saturday 3 p.m. I've not listened to any of them, but I've heard about them, and I'm always catching them and then, missing them.
No, they're good. I went to one. I think I've been to two actually. Yeah, both really interesting. Yeah.
And there's just various. There's so many at the moment, so really get yourself along. If you're in feminist circles, you'll probably see them popping up in your timeline.
There's a fundraiser at the moment for Sister Space, Sister with an H at the end. It's a domestic violence shelter or community space based in London for women of Afro-Caribbean heritage, so kind of specialist services for them. They've lost a lot of funding, so if you've got a couple of quid spare, please chuck it their way.
Yeah, we'll put a link in the description. This Sunday, 19th of July?
Oh God, we're in July, aren't we?
We're in July, aren't we? Speaker's Corner, a socially distanced discussion, feminist discussion. Posey Parker will be speaking. I am going to get up there and give my speech because I am sick of lockdown, and I think it's about time that we call time on this bullshit and actually start discussing how it's impacting women and what we're going to do about it and what we can do about it, and give a little space for a little bit of pushback on a lot of the orthodoxies around the lockdown, corona, and hopefully try not to get cancelled. So if you're in London or you fancy coming down, 2:00 Hyde Park Corner, and if you want to speak, come down and say what you like, because it's a free country, innit?
Yeah. Well, that's the point of Speaker's Corner. You can, people would go and use it to express
things.
Yeah.
I mean, when we went. We did an event just before lockdown, and we were wondering that we were good attacked by trans rights activists because there were a few famous so-called TERFs speaking. But actually, it was men's rights activists who came and But we ended up having a long discussion with one of the women who was a supporter of men's rights advocacy, and it was a lot more useful than just shouting things at each other on the internet. So you might not agree, but it's nice to have a space to disagree.
Yeah, and actually understand why they're saying what they're saying.
Yeah. Right, we're going to do our card game. Grace Murray Hopper, American, 1906 to 1992. A foremother of the information age, Grace Hopper was instrumental in creating and standardizing many of its raw materials, most notably COBOL, Common Business Orientated Language, the business programming language of choice from the earliest computers into the age of the microchip. Hopper was a professor of mathematics at Vassar when the Navy recruited her in 1943 to work in the first computer in the United States, the Mark I, at Harvard. There, she builds the first compiler to translate mathematical notions into machine code. The latter development of COBOL arose from her realization that most people communicate better with prose than with mathematical symbols, and that future computer use would not be limited to scientific applications. Hopper directed data processing development at UNIVAC for many years before being called back into service by the Navy at age 61 to standardise its computer programs and languages.
She sounds pretty cool.
Cool lady, innit? Yeah. Thank you for listening. Oh, we always forget, please subscribe or leave us a recommendation in the comments. It really helps to get us boosted up in the recommendations.
And if you want to cancel us, I don't know if maybe high profile might actually, maybe us being cancelled might actually raise our profile. So maybe we should give that a go.
Like the Streisand effect. Yeah, please. Write to my employer. Till next time.
Bye.